Okay, hello. We can start seeing people are joining us. Good evening, good morning, good day. My name is Elias Redstone. I'm the Artistic Director of Photo 2022 International Festival of Photography here in Melbourne. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Great Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of Melbourne, and I pay my deep respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm delighted to introduce the penultimate talk of our international season of Photo Live, presented in partnership with Autograph in London and supported by the British Council. It is presented as part of the UK-Australia season 2021 to 22, a collaboration between the British Council and DFAT. So this season of Photo Live has presented in total 10 online conversations between artists, photographers and curators from Australia and the UK to explore ideas of identity and belonging in the context of human rights, representation, and social justice. For each talk, an artist for one country is in conversation with a curator from the other country. And for this session, we are joined by Atong Atem, an Ethiopian-born South Sudanese artist and writer living here in Melbourne. Atong's photographic practice explores migrant narratives, post-colonial practices in the African diaspora, and concepts of identity, home, and liminal space. She presented an incredible installation at the Immigration Museum here in Melbourne as part of Photo 2021. And I'm pleased to announce we will be publishing her first photo book that will be launched at Photo 2022. More on this soon. So today, Atong will be in conversation with the art historian and curator, Zoé Whitley. Zoé has been director of Chisenhale Gallery in London since 2020, a space I personally greatly admire. And previously, she has held curatorial positions at the Victorian Albert Museum, Tate, and the Hayward Gallery. Today's conversation will last 45 minutes. Feel free to leave questions at any time during the talk using the Q&A function. If you're watching this live and would like to access captions, please click close captions and select subtitles. That's all for me. I will now hand over to Zoé and Atong. Thank you both very much.
Oh, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Good morning and good evening. I'd like to also thank the organizers of Photo Live and my friends and esteemed colleagues at Autograph ABP for inviting me to speak to such a talented young photographer today. I would also like to humbly acknowledge and respect the Indigenous lands. I don't take for granted how technologies allow us to convene in ways that would have been impossible even a few years ago. So without further preamble, I'm so excited to talk with Atong today. So Atong, hello.
Hi, Zoe. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be speaking with you.
I know this is
very
really
exciting.
Oh no, I feel the same way, and it's wonderful to see the participants in the room. So I would equally just urge you, as we only have, well now, 40 minutes, do please feel that you're also a part of this conversation. And as it is a seminar format, if you use either the Q&A box, preferably, or the chat function, I'll keep an eye so that I can pose any questions to Atong that you may have. But to start, I think it would be really wonderful for us to begin by discussing the notion of home. You live in Australia, of course. You were born in Ethiopia in 1994 and identified
1991.
Oh boy, there are different dates.
Yeah, I will happily accept 1994.
No, that's a prodigy. This is very good. Oh, excuse me, I read the wrong thing. And identify with your homeland, South Sudan, whose independence was declared 10 years ago now in 2011. And when we first spoke, you used the stunning phrase of South Sudan's cosmic becoming. And I give all of that to foreground what is maybe a deceptively simple question. How do you define home? And where does it exist for you?
That is a cosmic question in and of itself, I would say. I think it's complicated by the fact that in my opinion anyway, this desire to claim home and to claim a space that is yours and that belongs to you, it feels like it's quite like a, I don't know, it's maybe not natural to everybody, and maybe it's not natural to all cultures to want to claim physical space. So in recent years, I've been sort of detaching my relationship to home as a physical space, and more so now looking at where do I feel, the ways that I want to feel, what are the spaces in which I feel capable. Sorry, I'm like this close to sneezing, but it won't happen. Happy springtime. Yeah, so I'm very unsure, I should say, about where I would say home is for me. But what I can like comfortably and honestly speak to is the fact that I am searching for that place at all times. And I make special note of places where that feels true. When I visited South Sudan in 2011 to celebrate our independence, I had this assumption that I would automatically have this feeling and this sort of light work, what is it called? Like a sparkle, you know, beautiful, intense thing. But that didn't happen automatically. And it slowly happened over time as I built connections with family members that I hadn't seen since I was really young. And as I built connections to the physical landscape in a way that was, you know, personal and all of that. So yeah, home is like it's a doing thing, you know, like it's not a noun maybe.
Yeah, that maybe it's a verb.
Yeah.
So it's something active. Okay. I think that's a beautiful definition for us to begin with. And I think that as an action, as a doing thing, actually then is really helpful for us to think about your engagement with photography, because you've described that as responding to a pre-existing history from your own vantage point, and actually attaching yourself to this much longer arc of visual culture to be reminded of home. So can we maybe spend a little bit of time talking about that, how you came to photography as a chosen medium?
Yeah, absolutely. I am really grateful that I have such a specific reference point for how and why I found photography. Essentially, for me, photography was about learning history. And as someone who was at art school and interested in visual art, it made sense that I could connect to history in a tangible way through visual art. So when I was at uni, feeling that I wasn't learning what I wanted to learn, or maybe the perspectives and the frameworks weren't necessarily like entirely welcoming of perspectives and frameworks that I knew existed outside of the canon, it was natural to search in really, really basic ways on Google, South Sudanese photography or African photography and all that kind of thing. And it's probably changed quite a lot since then, but the things that came up were ethnographic photographs, essentially. And it was quite confronting to immediately be shown this very specific, very colonial perspective of where, you know, African peoples exist within this medium that for me had this other language, which was like my family's relationship to photography and my family's relationship to I guess the archival potential and the celebratory potential of the photo medium. So trying to bring these two worlds together, this sort of like external ethnographic colonial photographic potential and this like beautiful sentimental, you know, celebratory intimate photographic potential from my family, it felt that there was just a lot for me to learn there that I probably wasn't going to learn without initiative. So my relationship to photography has always been one of, I guess, finding that home, finding that that sense of I can sit here comfortably. And a lot of that has come from a lot of West African photographers whose works really spoke to, you know, pivotal moments in history where the lens was turned, you know, from this sort of external looking in kind of position to one of inter-community personal potential, like what happens when that lens is flipped, what happens when the camera is reversed, what happens when we take ownership of things that have been used to define us for other people or for external benefits. And that like I've never really moved on from that particular moment in history, and that's the moment, or that's the history that I want to participate in. Like I'm very, you know, loud and proud about the fact that I'm not trying to do anything new with my photographic practice. I'm trying to celebrate and attach myself to and find my place and my home within this existing history of African photography as post-colonial resistance or something like that. Yeah,
well,
so
I want to
it's
push back on that a little bit, because I appreciate the modesty, but I do think you are doing something new, you know, from your subjective vantage point. And I think that as a way of extending a kind of co-creative agency, because so much of what I hear you talking about really does hinge on the notion of power. Who's doing the looking, who's doing the being looked at, and really interrogating that in ways that allow for a whole different understanding of visual identification and where we can identify with others. And again, this is one of those places where I think, you know, prepositions, you know, you talked about like the difference between home being a noun, or, you know, embodying it more as a verb. I think it's something similar in terms of thinking about what's dictated to us or to you, and what you can then create that is for or about a group of individuals. And that is a nuance that comes across so strongly in your work. And I'd like for us to pick up on that more. But first, if you don't mind, we do have a question in the chat box from Angela, and she'd like to add to that question of home and ask, do you feel at home in Australia? I ask this because, being of Caribbean parents born in England, I never feel 100% at home. So thank you, Angela, for that question.
Do I feel at home in Australia? I mean, you know, I want to say no, because I have this really strong relationship with not wanting to take up space here in a country that is colonized and has such like an intense existing colonial history. And there's this, I have this, you know, desire to not take up space in that way, especially as a migrant. I wasn't born here. I don't have that sort of experience of being, you know, maybe a second generation migrant or whatever. My experience is that I come from a specific place. Whether my relationship to home can be designated by like where I physically come from or not is a totally different question. But in reality, if there's nowhere else in the world that I know and knows this well, and I grew up here, and I have a sense of belonging, I suppose, to my experience in this place, and reckoning with what that looks like in practice. Like, what does it look like to be a migrant belonging or feeling comfortable in a place that isn't yours, I think is more relevant than the feeling. So yeah, I do feel at home in Australia, especially comparatively to everywhere else in the world. This is the like only place where I've had a sense of, this is where I've discovered myself, and this is where I've discovered how I feel about things. That being said, to go back to the feeling of it, do I feel at home? I feel like I feel a lot of things all the time, and the importance of those feelings is you know, intangible. I know the things that I want to do and enact, and I suppose my relationship to home is a relationship to maybe peeling back the feelings to get to the core of like, what is the action in there? Like when I feel a certain way, you know, negative emotion or whatever, I can peel it back and say, okay, I feel grumpy because I'm hungry and there's an action involved in that. I feel, you know, whatever because I'm tired, whatever. I feel stressed because I'm doing too much and I need to cut back. I feel this innate sense of wanting to belong and want to feel at home. And if I peel back, what's there other than just that we're all humans and we all strive for connection and for a sense of place. And I would say that my practice is really about looking, you know, under the onion skin of feelings to try to figure out what do I want actually.
Matt, as a rhetorical question, hearing you say all of that, at that kind of note of belonging, I think there's something wonderful there about how around that kernel will exist a community. So I wonder, are you willing to share with us something about maybe the the creative community or the supportive community that you've been able to surround yourself with in Melbourne generally, or a community of other makers, artists, photographers that help kind of sustain your practice and your ideas and you as a person?
Absolutely. I am very extremely blessed and honored and proud to have extremely supportive, encouraging and honest people in my life, which means that yeah, I suppose, again, like, I feel like the theme of this particular conversation will be about home and maybe defining that desire. So much of the relationships that I foster creatively and otherwise here are based on that feeling and following that feeling of, I feel at home with you, I feel capable with you, I feel like I can relax. I spend so much time, I should say, I'm, you know, trying to manifest positivity. I have spent so much time in my life holding so much burden, so many burdens that aren't necessarily mine to hold in the first place. But for me, that feeling of like ease is so, it's so precious. It's extremely precious. And so much of my work is collaborative because it feels so important for me to be able to showcase and present the people that have given me that light feeling, you know, and to create spaces for us to work in tandem to create something beautiful in terms of my photographic practice and the works that I do. So I almost always work with friends, and that's not just because all my friends are extremely beautiful, it's also because all of my friends are extremely generous and like willing to participate, not just as a sitter in front of my lens, but as a like person in dialogue with my practice, and as a person in dialogue with the medium of photography, and as a person in dialogue with, I guess, like the art world in general, because I think the community that I have is so important because it's what allows me to make work in the first place. I don't think that the work that I'm making now would exist without that collaborative essence that sort of started it all. Like the first series of photographic works I did were with a bunch of African friends that I have here, and I asked them all to come to a space at my university at the time, and I offered to pay for everyone's dinner, but I completely forgot because I was so stressed. But my friends were so sweet that they brought food themselves. Like it was just this thing of like, it wasn't just the tangible practical things that they did that were really supportive, but for me to speak about the importance of photography and the history of photography, and for that language to be understood beyond the practical, and to kind of have this this bridge of feeling again that just allowed so much to happen. Like I'm very, very, very honored to have the kinds of people that I can have dialogue with. Yeah, it's just, community has done so much for me as an artist.
That way of thinking about cultivating ease, I think, is something that really comes through in the work. And so I have a different question, because while photography has opened so many new beginnings and possibilities, and what's effectively a kind of an ongoing self-portrait of, if not you literally, then certainly your life and your thoughts. One thing that comes to mind is, you know, from your university days and your earlier training, why did you stop painting?
You sound like my mom. My mom keeps saying, I love your photos.
No judgment in the question.
No, it's just a really interesting phrase, because my mum is amazing. She's literally my hero, and she's the coolest, most amazing, incredible human specimen in the world. She has this thing though where she's like, oh, I love your photos, they're so beautiful and all of that, but when are you going to make art again? And I find that really, really interesting. So a small part of me is like, I want to get to the point where my mum instinctively, without being prompted, refers to my photographs as art. And it's like, yes, I have communicated the relevance of photography as a medium within the art canon and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, why did I stop painting? I stopped painting because I found photography. Essentially, it's for me, I don't think there's any one medium that I will ever stick to for a myriad of reasons, but mostly because I think my approach to making works and working on particular projects is about what it, like, you know, I try to establish for myself what the best medium to express those ideas is. And I came to photography because I wanted to write an essay in uni about ethnographic photography and its evolution in, like, you know, whatever, the world. Specifically, it was during that time when there was a lot of like fashion magazines that were replicating sort of African studio photography with African models, and there was just something very, very fascinating about who was doing the photographing and for what purpose, and this sort of, like, it was very fascinating. And so I felt this draw to talk about it in the language of the medium. And so rather than writing an essay, because I'm not awesome at it all the time, and especially because I was excited about taking photographs, I took a bunch of photographs, and that was the studio series, 2015, I think that was. So I've only been doing kind of photography for a really short amount of time. And as soon as I found this medium to communicate these really particular ideas, more stuff was unearthed that I felt was best communicated through photography. And fast forward to 2021, and I'm still using photography because I'm not finished, you know. And it's not that I ever got to a point where I felt that I was finished with painting. I got distracted by photography, and I loved the language enough to continue. Also, it is a lot cheaper to have an SD card as opposed to like buying canvas and oil paints. Like, it's very economic to be a photographer in a lot of ways.
All of those practical considerations, I appreciate you mentioning those, because there may well be artists participating in the call or who will listen to the recording later. And I think all of those variables play a part in how you feel able to express yourself and what you're able to do with the materials that you have to hand. And I think particularly hearing about your response to these kind of ubiquitous images that exist all around us, like in fashion imagery, is particularly resonant to me. I did my own MA in representations of Blackness in Vogue magazine, but at the time, this was right at the tipping point. I submitted before Italian Vogue's Black issue. So there had been this institutional tautology that kind of locked Black models out of most mainstream publications before that had this kind of economic imperative, like, we're not able to put Black models on the cover of magazines because if we do, the sales are lower and circulation is lower for that month. And yet it was a kind of completely circular logic, because consistently magazines were putting Black models on the lowest circulation issues of the year. And so it was a kind of foregone conclusion that then was, you know, self-justifying. So I think it means a lot to see how you were able to identify a visual pattern that you noticed, and to think, actually, there's a way to articulate this in a manner that is intuitive and that can communicate a disquiet or an unease, but equally to do that in a language that's very incredibly beautiful, but without lacking in criticality, to kind of push those narratives.
Yeah,
that was a comment, not a question, I realize.
Sorry. No, but I mean, look, I do not need questions to respond. I am happy to say words. Just to kind of bounce off of that, I think there's such a I don't know, I can't speak for anyone other than myself, but I will say that for me, the world that I exist in is such a, like, I exist in it. I can't remove myself in any practical way. But I'm so, again, this is in reference to me early, like, in a lot of ways talking about my practice as an ongoing self-portrait. And so much of that is because regardless of my intention, that's going to be the case. But there's just this fascinating thing of, like, the way that really specific actions, you know, historical actions kind of are watered down and become just part of the cultural mainstream in a way that is, like, affecting but subliminal, I suppose. And it feels a bit like gaslighting or something to be a person who sees it or feels it, but it doesn't have maybe the confirmation or the language for it, So it kind of made sense that as a uni student, that's what I would respond to, the things that existed within my immediate everyday realm, and the things that felt, you know, had an impact on my actual everyday existence, especially within like an art school context. It's like, what am I seeing as a visual artist in training, and how do I make more things to be seen in response to all of the things that I'm seeing constantly? Yeah, that's why I take photos.
We're all very, very glad that you do. One of the things that we discussed when we had our kind of pre-chat was, I'd mentioned to you that I had just come from a talk with a food historian, Dr. Jessica B. Harris, and she was talking about African diasporic foodways. So for instance, how we could find okra on the west coast of Africa, but also in the south of the United States, and then as well as throughout Brazil and elsewhere, and that food could become a means of healing a rupture. And there was something that I found in our conversations, or even in how I hear you speak about community today, and your friends bringing dinner, that this is actually, your practice in many ways feels like a proposition where photography can also propose a means of healing a rupture. And so I wonder what's been important to you in your handling of photography to specifically resist those kind of confining narratives that would otherwise have you kind of speaking back to the whole of colonial history of photography, instead of just leaning into that cultivation of ease and lightness that you spoke of earlier.
Yeah, that's something that's nice to talk about, actually, because it can often feel, to me anyway, and I don't know if this is how it comes across to others, there is so many things buzzing in my head in relation to why and how I create work. And there's this huge, intense, you know, intense history that I speak about responding to or existing within or outside of, beside, and it's colonialism, and it's, you know, patriarchy, and it's like all of this very, very intense real stuff. But my work isn't a response to colonialism. It's not a response to patriarchy. It's none of that. That's the foundation that I live on. That's the depth of the soil that I stand on. And it's important for me to kind of, you know, articulate and recognize that for my sake, honestly, more than anybody else's. So I guess my resistance, or my claim or something when it comes to making photographic works, it's so much about just the intimacy of photography and working with intention to, I suppose my photographic practice came out of my understanding and my research, I suppose, into like ethnographic photography. So I came to understand that ethnographic photography exists and existed in a really particular way, but continues to exist. And I felt a particular way about that truth and that history. And so I endeavored to make work that that offered something else, I suppose, like that countered the like violent ownership potential of the camera lens with something else entirely. And what I found and what I saw other photographers do that I admired and that I wanted to participate in was the ability for photography to be about witnessing rather than capturing, and for photography to be about the photographer in a much more explicit way. So I just love to take photos of people that I love for whatever reason, or just take photos of people and to just bear witness to their existence, and to bear witness to whatever conversations we've had and how that's left them, or to bear witness to the response of like body language, or you know, we're holding space or whatever. Like it can be all of that airy fairy stuff, and it can also just be like, in this moment in time, like I'm going to make the light hit you in a particular way because I want to capture this thing that I'm seeing you might not see. And it's not even about like skill per se. Like I'm not a skilled photographer. I sort of thought that I needed to learn more about the art and the technology But for me, photography is just, I spoke about this actually in a talk a little while ago, but seeing the camera as like an extension of my eye, and this sort of like cyborg relationship to the camera. That's what I love about photography, that it's doing things that I can't do, or doing things in a way that like I'm inviting people into my brain to look through my eyes. And I think that's really powerful. And there's so much potential in that. And it's such a waste, I feel, when that sharing potential, come and see what I'm seeing, see it with me, see it like me, becomes, I want you to look look the way that I want you to look. Like there's just such a, again, it's the nuance of language, isn't it? But that's what gets me excited, this sort of cyborg lens thing, and the like magic of bringing people into my brain. I think it's really like very powerful.
Indeed. Aside from those kind of the technical aspects, I think just from an exercise of looking, who else are you looking toward in their photographic practices or in other visual practices where you're then able to help elaborate that distinction, or where you see that distinction? Because I'm fascinated in this nuance that you're making between I want you to see through my eyes versus I want you to see the world in this way. Do you feel that there are other either photographers or, you know, authors working in any range of medium who are able to kind of really get that distinction right?
Yeah, I mean, endless list. I feel like who am I following on Instagram? That's the quick answer. But yeah, I mean, one person that comes to mind right now, because I've just been looking through her work for a different project where I want to reference her, is Jen Nkiru, who's a filmmaker. And there was just something extremely powerful about Jen's work that I thought, because there's this, I think, I'm going on a tangent, but I think it's maybe relevant. But I used to think and feel that the only way to be honest in a photographic sense was through like documentary photography. And then obviously, like any kind of photography can be manipulated. So it's not the manipulation that is deceitful. It is the intention and the way that it's presented, and also the relationship between the photographer and the sitter or subject. Because I find it really important to create like an ethical relationship between the person I'm photographing and their comfort and how they feel. And like, you know, there's this weird thing in a lot of photography where you do not show the person you're photographing the photographs as you go. Whereas it's like, I want to feel your comfort, and anyway, like it's just, that's really important. So I used to believe that documentary could only ever be like a particular way. And then I was looking at Jen's work, and there was something really like evocative about the ability to stylize whilst also speaking truth, and the ability to create fiction that feels intimate and personal and true, which I just think is really, really powerful and really, really difficult to do. And you know, Zanelli Maholi does that as well with their self-portraits, which are like heavily stylized, and there's like harsh contrast, and it's just an honest photograph, you know, like it's just an honest view through their eye of themselves and of the people that they photograph. So I think the majority of the people who I'm feeling that from, I think, are people who can resonate in some ways with that that history of like post-colonial African photography. Like that's a really pivotal moment, and it's a lot of like young people too. And I'm not to say that it's only young people that have been doing that. Like I remember coming across the works of Gordon Parks and like all the photographs that he took in the 50s in the southern states of America, which is like very documentary in that it was just photos of people living their lives, but it's still stylized, and there's still certain, you can see what the photographer's drawn to, and it's not, I mean, I don't know, maybe surveillance is the only honest documentation, you know, but there's a power in being able to create fiction in photography, and for that to be truth-telling as well. So yeah, and I guess the reverse of that, and the thing that I witnessed that felt like the antithesis of what I wanted to do as a photographer, was things like fashion photography, or photography that was purely about style, or purely about you know, purely narrative, and without room for maybe the subject to speak and to exist in some way or form. I guess like portraiture that feels like landscape, maybe, where it's just about the still moment in like a non-breathing way. Like, yeah, there's just, it's very nuanced, I suppose, but it's the feeling, again, to go back to what we were talking about before. It's that feeling.
So that I'm fascinated that you brought up Jen, because in our kind of few remaining minutes, I was going to ask you to speak about your turn to film. So you've referenced a filmmaker, and that film in your work is actually a kind of a turning point that moves us from the kind of broader arc of your photographic practice to some of the concerns that you're working through and with right in this moment. So can you tell us about, again, this kind of move from a still image to moving image?
It just makes sense, doesn't it, in a lot of ways. I think for me, wanting to do film and moving into film and my relationship to it right now is like one of, I think photography is, for me, about trying to capture maybe the liminal, like those sort of like liminal kind of emotional spaces that we can occupy. And there's something really powerful about being able to, I don't know how to word it, but it's like, you know, most film is like 24 frames per second. And that's sort of like that fluid, but kind of slow motion. And it feels in some ways that still photography is a certain number of frames per second too, but it's just like a really short film, or it's a really long film. Like each individual photograph doesn't have to exist outside of like a broader body of work of photographs. And, you know, each frame just might not necessarily be a fluid motion from one to the other or whatever. And I just got really interested in this notion of like photography and like, I don't know, this like very slow moving liquid or something that is still, there's still movement in it. It's just like subatomic or something, you know, the photograph will fade over time or whatever. And film is just another version of that. And I was really, 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 really interested in like how I can, if I can, bring this sort of like fantastical honesty that I'm trying to do with photography into film, and like how I can do that with movement as opposed to posture and as opposed to posing. And there's like, I take photographs as like very, very intentional kind of small little movements, but it's also not intensely directed. It's quite like, you know, natural and collaborative. And it felt like in photography, I'm documenting the process of getting dressed, putting on the makeup, sitting, posing, lighting, looking, all of that. So I guess I wanted to perform more of the process in like in a moving image kind of way, but also just because I love the combination of sound and image as well, and wanting to play with time in that way was like, I don't know, I love it all so much.
It really shows. We've got 5 minutes left, so I don't know if we have any questions from the audience. So that would be a kind of final one. But I think I wanted to come back to this notion of creating images, whether moving images or still images, as this form of healing, because one of the gifts you've given to me is to send me some research about Dinka forms of traditional healing, both for people and animals in southern Sudan. And in reading through that and just understanding the care that's taken with every living thing, I was just wanting to know how you had come to that particular body of research, and if that is something that, you know, in the way that as a form of healing, a kind of geographical or colonial rupture is a form of healing, how any bodies of work you might be working on now could then start to extend toward a connection back to southern Sudan.
Oh, I mean, I want to talk really vaguely, but like quite literally, the body of work that I'm working on now for that photo book that Elias mentioned is a literal response to that. And I guess that my interest in the healing practices and all of that is just like, I have such a solid, strong understanding of like Christianity. I have such a solid, strong understanding of technology and all of these, you know, ologies and anities and all of it. There's just so much ideology in my brain, and not very much of it is South Sudanese, other than my own familial culture, you know, my immediate family cultures. So for me, it's just about education, but wanting to know if a lot of these sort of like feelings and thoughts and ideas that I have that I don't remember learning are things that I've just picked up from my cellular DNA, or if they're like, you know, genetic markers of like something, you know what I mean? Like in this sort of fake sciencey way that I'm talking, but it just trying to reconcile the feelings that I have about the world and about my place in it. And photography absolutely does that, especially the photography that I'm interested in creating. And like I feel that I have so many opportunities to heal and to do all of that stuff just by virtue of being in space with people who allow me to frame them and to, you know, put them into these worlds. Yeah, I don't know, it's like, it's just really, there's just so much in this little body of mine, and I spend as much time as I humanly can either responding to it or like getting into my little ball and thinking about it. And I'm just really blessed to have access to a medium like that allows me to do that, and that I can do it constantly in lots of different ways and like call it art. And then people are like, oh yeah, good job.
So this is our final question, and it comes from Ali. Do you plan your performances for the moving image pieces, or is it all improvised?
It's a bit of both. So I'll talk about Banksia because that's sort of like the biggest film that I've made, and I love it and it means a lot to me, and it was very collaborative and a big learning moment. But because I'm a photographer, I suppose most of my way of planning out the shoot was through like scenes with like a rough idea, because that's the way I approach photography. I'll sort of be like, this is the person I want to photograph, and I have these sorts of fabrics and they might have this, and we'll shoot in daytime, so we have to use natural lighting, and then let's see what happens. It's like, I don't know, it feels like I bring tea and biscuits, and then the conversation is the work, you know. So with the moving image work, it's similar to that. It's like, I know that I want to present this particular idea, I know that I want to capture this particular thing, but like one of the scenes which has it's the final scene, and if you will ever get to see the film, you'll see it. It just has a bunch of women wearing these beautiful colored clothes, and I knew I just wanted them to show joy. And so it was just about creating a space where those people could feel genuine joy and then documenting it. Yeah, that's essentially my approach.
Oh, that's a beautiful place to end, documenting joy. It's been a joy to spend this 45 minutes with you. And while it will be a slightly abrupt ending, there are other Photo Live talks to come. So thank you very much. And Atong, thank you so much for giving so much of yourself today.
Thank you so much, Zoe. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you again.
Very good. Farewell, everyone.
Bye.